Welcome to the Parenting Decolonized podcast. I'm your host, Yolanda Williams, entrepreneur, conscious parenting coach, and single mom to one amazing toddler. I'm on a mission to help shine the light on how colonization has impacted the Black family structure. If you're a parent that wants to learn how to decolonize your parenting, you're in the right place. Let's do this. Hey y'all, I'm delighted to bring you an eye-opening interview today about Black maternal mortality with Dr. Theresa Chapple. Theresa is an expert reproductive and perinatal epidemiologist who has been sounding the alarm for 19 years that if Black moms are not healthy, then they cannot bring forth and raise healthy babies. If babies are coming into the world unhealthy, then how do we expect them to grow into healthy adults? She believes in breaking cycles, ending generational health curses, and decolonizing the medical and public health fields. Let's welcome Dr. Theresa Chapple. Thank you so much for joining us, Theresa. Really appreciate you being my very first interview for Parenting Decolonized. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm super psyched.
I'm so excited. I want to start talking about this first because I really think that talking about trauma and that kind of thing during pregnancy and during labor and sometimes resulting in death is a good place to start when we talk about like decolonizing parenting. I mean, it's really it's something that is all over the news, but I'm not sure that people are still paying attention.
Yeah, I think that, if we start off our parenting experience being traumatized, then I think, that has to clearly play into the way that we parent, the steps that we take after that. So, yeah, this is a great place to start.
Thank you. So I did a lot of research before we spoke, and I know you speak about this sometimes in our conscious parenting group. By the way, y'all, Theresa is a great moderator in a conscious parenting group that I have called Conscious Parenting for the Culture. Look it up on Facebook. But we speak about this sometimes, but we haven't really gone into depth about it. Can you explain to people what your area of expertise is when it comes to Black maternal mortality and why it's something that we need to really be discussing more within the Black community?
Sure. So, I have this really unique expertise, and the area of medicine that I work in is called reproductive and perinatal epidemiology. And almost no one has heard of that. And when I ask my sisters what I do for a living, she tells me that my specialty is that I can tell people how many birth control pills turned into an abortion pill.
Huh?
It's not what I do.
I don't even, what? Sister? She's just making stuff up.
She really does.
Just say, I don't know.
Right. So what I actually do is that I focus in on what are those areas that we can do to prevent fetal death, infant death, and maternal death. And what's interesting is that it's really a continuum. The same thing that causes a fetus to die is the same thing that causes an infant to die, and the same thing that causes a mom to die. Most of the times we don't think about it as this continuum. We look at it as these one-off events. And that has really limited the medical society in trying to figure out how to prevent these things. But if we look at it as like there's a straight line connecting all these things, then we are better able to figure out ways to prevent these deaths from occurring. And my focus is on Black women and Black babies because across this spectrum, we're 3 times more likely to die across all aspects of it. We're 3 times more likely to have a fetus die than white women. We're 3 times more likely to have our babies not reach their first birthday than white women. And we're 3 times more likely to die either in pregnancy or as a result of pregnancy when we compare ourselves to white women.
Wow. I mean, those are startling stats and scary, Do you think that when we hear stuff like that, what as women, especially if someone is pregnant, what should we be taking from when we hear those kind of stats?
Right. Okay, so I always try and start with the fact that death of a baby, death of a fetus, and death of a mom are rare. So what I don't want people to walk away with is fear that they're going to die because they're pregnant. I want them to instead know that we have over 3 million pregnancies each year in the United States, and we have 700 moms who die. So it's a really rare thing. However, we should have zero moms die. So while it's rare, it's extremely important and extremely impactful for the family that it happens to, right? So I want to try and like squash fear, but I also want to make people know that this is still really important, really significant, and that 70% of maternal deaths are preventable.
Mm.
So let's figure out in that sweet spot right there what we can do about those preventable deaths. Let's also figure out what we can do about the fact that Black women are experiencing it 3 times more than white women. So there are going to be maternal deaths that happen that we can't do anything about, but we can do something about the gap. We can do something about the excess burden that Black women and Black families carry.
Yeah, I totally agree. We can do something about that, and we can advocate as consumers, as mothers, as just as people and parents in general. What I wanted to talk about with you was, do you feel like because there's a sort of like a cultural distrust in the medical profession, do you agree with that or no?
I do.
And what do you think that comes from? Because I know, for instance, when I was pregnant, I had a pretty, healthy pregnancy, despite the fact that I was overweight and over the age of 36. It was my second pregnancy, but I still had all this trepidation about going into the doctor's office. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm just gonna be 100, keep it 100. I never went back after I had Gia, like, and no one checked up on me either. So I never went back for a checkup after that. And I had a pretty traumatic birth experience. And I think that's why I never went back in. I was actually afraid to go look at them again. But do you think that part of the reason that we have this distrust is how doctors perceive Black people's experience of pain, or that they distrust that we don't know what we're talking about our own bodies?
Okay, so I'm sure that this is with everything, right, that Black people go through, is that it exists for other people, but it
Mhm.
exists more for us, right? So there's a whole, like, if you go to the hashtag listen to women, then you'll see all of these women from all different walks of life talk about how their doctors ignored them, right?
Mhm.
Their doctors dismissed whatever they were talking about. But when you like, and that's just a part of womanhood in America, which pretty much sucks. But then you put Black on top of it, and then we are like, we 3 times more likely not to be heard, not to be
Right.
listened, to be taken seriously. I remember my first pregnancy experience that ended in a miscarriage, and I
Mhm.
had had the miscarriage surgically removed. And I remember going in and telling them, like, hi, my name is Dr. Theresa Chapple. I am an important person. Don't kill me. Right?
Oh my gosh.
But I remember thinking like I have to go in and I have to like get them to know and understand that I'm not, I'm someone who they need to take serious while we're going through this because I want to come out on the other side alive.
Mhm.
And it's a huge burden for Black people to bear that we have to make doctors see our value in order for us to come out on the other side alive.
I mentioned someone that is not a doctor, someone that is from a low income family that doesn't even have insurance. Like, they can't necessarily make that statement. And either way, doctor or no, everyone should be getting a high quality of care. That really makes me upset.
I totally feel that way too. I mean, I come from a neighborhood and, that is an impoverished neighborhood in West Philadelphia.
Hmm.
I'm the only one in my family that is a doctor. And so when I go and when I have these conversations with doctors, interactions with the hospital settings, I'm thinking to myself, how would my sister be treated? How would my
Mm.
nieces be treated? And so, yeah, this is totally something that needs to come to the forefront. But the good thing is that it is coming to the forefront. These hashtags, these stories, these on and on, doctors are having these kind of conversations. September 22nd, there's a whole conference going on about decolonizing birth experiences for Black women. So I think it's getting out there. People are hearing. I think that there's definitely has to be time for a culture shift, right? So in the meantime, what's going to happen to women while we're making these changes and while the medical field is finally hearing and listening? I think that we have to take on the burden of advocating for ourselves,
Hmm.
which is really hard to do. And I mean, just from my personal experience, I had a birth injury with my last pregnancy. And when I think back into all the things that went wrong and all the times that I didn't speak up and all the things that I didn't say, I'm like, wow, it is really hard to advocate for yourself while you're
It
in
is.
pain.
Well, and not even just when you're in pain, when you're, from my perspective, when you're in there and they're telling you stuff like, well, we got to do this for your baby. And it feels like it's life and death for your child. And who's going to, in that moment, you're thinking that what they say is what you need to do in order to keep your child alive.
Hmm.
Whereas, is it though? But you, I'm not a doctor. I can't call it. I don't know if I say no, don't do this, if if I'm making the right choice. Because if it did result in the death of my child, I mean, oh my God, you know what I'm saying? So like that to me, like some of the pressure that is put on women in hospitals is completely unnecessary. Sometimes I feel in order for us to have a quick delivery and to move us out of that bed and to move someone else in. I
Hmm.
feel like that's part of it.
That's definitely an interesting thought. I don't know where I fall on that thought one way or the other, but I do know that what can help the situation is having a doula present.
Yeah.
And I really feel like had I had a doula at any of my 3 deliveries, my outcomes would have been different all 3 times. I think that what's really cool is that some states are changing their Medicaid policies where they're letting Medicaid pay for doulas to attend births of low income women and Black women. I think that's amazing. And I think if that's kind of something that we can put out there, something that we
Mm,
can let our young sisters and cousins and everyone know that, yeah, it's great to have grandma in the room, but we need a doula present too. I
yes.
think that could really start to change our birth stories.
I totally wanted a doula. At the time, I did not have any insurance. I just moved to Arkansas to be close to my family, and I didn't think it was possible for me. And actually, it may not be in Arkansas, but the fact that that's changing is really hopeful.
Yeah, I think that if it's not in your state, one of the things that we can easily do as people, write to our representatives and ask for it. I used to be the head of maternal and child health for the state of Georgia. And one of the things that we did a lot was that I worked closely with the Medicaid director, and we would make policy. Like the two of us would sit down, I would do a return on investment analysis, and we would make policy.
Mm,
It's literally as simple as sitting in a room and discussing something, and at the end of the day, walking out with something. So if your legislators aren't willing to listen, then find out who your Title V or MCH director is at the state and write to them.
yeah.
There's literally people who can make these changes at the drop of a dime.
Yeah, we do need to be our own advocates. We do need to speak up. We do need to become politically involved in this type of issue. If we don't, we're leaving it up to people who have no idea about like what it feels like to be a Black woman, what it feels like to have a birth experience that's traumatic. I know you said that women of all races have these experiences, but the fact that it happens so often with Black women, what do you feel contributes to that?
Racism.
Okay.
Um, I think that is the only answer, and that we need to be able to say that word. We need to be able to discuss that word, and we need to be able to have clear understanding of what that word means in a medical context.
Hmm.
And for Black women, it doesn't, in a medical context, it doesn't mean that, that your white doctor hates all Black people, as much as it means that there's preconceived notions about how Black people will view pain. There's preconceived notions about the power dynamic between a Black patient and a doctor, and that these are things that need to be broken down and discussed even beforehand. So for me, one thing that I would love the regular average pregnant woman to do
Hmm.
is to not give birth with a doctor that you don't feel comfortable with.
Mm,
So that's the first thing we can do to start protecting our own selves. Is that if we don't trust them, if we have lied to our doctor during the 9 months that we're, going to them, then that's not the right doctor for you. If you can't say, yeah, I didn't take those prenatal vitamins and I don't ever plan on, then you have the wrong doctor.
right.
Right?
Right.
Uh, so there are some small things that we can do to help um, ensure that we have a better outcome
And this
while we're waiting for the system to change.
because that goes for anyone who doesn't have insurance too. I mean, I still got to pick my doctor. I still got to go and actually have a conversation with this person, go to, my first appointment, and I still could change her. I
Mhm.
wasn't, it wasn't like, I mean, I chose her. I just happened to choose the easiest person. I didn't think about it, but, and I felt comfortable with her, but it wasn't a very intimate. I didn't feel, you see in the movies and people like are talking to their doctor and their doctor helps them understand things. I didn't feel like I had that with her. It was kind of a
Mhm.
rushed experience. I spoke to the nurses more, and I don't know if that's the normal experience, but there still is room to advocate for yourself in that respect, is what I'm trying to say. Like, even if you don't have any insurance and you're on government insurance, like you can still pick your doctor and you can still
Mhm.
change your doctor if you're not comfortable.
Yes. Yes. And I do. I want women to know that. I want families to know that. Another thing is a birthing plan. And if your doctor hasn't mentioned to you that you can have a birthing plan, then that's probably not the right doctor to have.
Hmm.
Together, you guys should be talking about, who do you want in the room? What do you want to happen? Do you want to breastfeed? Do you want us to offer formula? What do you want us to do about pain? They should be asking you those questions, and together you should be creating a birth plan that can
Mm.
be the go-to in the situation where you're having too much pain and you can't answer questions. They should be able to go and pull up your birth plan and be able to say, okay, this is what she wanted.
Wow. Like, honestly, I didn't know that. I researched my own birth plan and I told her this is what I want. And she told me what could and couldn't happen. And that was literally the end of the discussion. By the time I got induced, that whole thing went completely out of the window.
So part of the birth planning process needs to be, what happens? What do you want me to do? Me being your doctor, what do you want me to do in a case of emergency? How do you want me to communicate to you when I have to throw your birth plan out the window?
Oh, okay.
No one wants to be induced. Well, that's not true.
I did. I was like 11 days overdue. I was like, this baby got to this eviction time. You got to go. I'm sorry. And that's again is not understanding. She was for it. And you know what I'm saying? Not
Mhm.
understanding that, hey, babies come when they come. I was so tired and so ready
Oh yeah.
for it to be over that I was just like, get this baby out of me. And she was like, okay, come back, on Tuesday and we make it happen. I was not dilated. They gave me massive amounts of pitocin,
Mm.
and they claimed it was for a test they were doing of her heartbeat, but then they just kept doing it, and I was just like, this is not what I told you guys. This is not what I wanted. By that time, it was too late.
Yeah, I think that another piece is understanding what induction is. I
Mhm.
think that the average mom would think that induction is just to hurry up and get the baby out, without understanding the physiological things that it's doing to your body, and then how much control you lose in the process.
So out of control, I felt like I had no control over anything.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Once you induce, you've lost control.
Yeah.
It's the same as, say, in a C-section, right? You have no control in a C-section. And so I think it's really kind of educating women on our bodies, on birthing, on all that stuff. And I think this is really just a huge piece that gets lost in the whole conversations about our bodies and what our bodies can do. We
Mhm.
we really never have conversations in Black families about natural childbirth. We don't have those conversations about breastfeeding, and we don't have those conversations about, what does it mean when your child just keeps nursing on and on. Like, our grandmas would come in the room and say, feed that baby formula, that baby's still hungry, instead
Right.
of saying, oh, this is cluster feeding and this is what it's like. So there's some things that we can do to kind of educate ourselves in order to approach pregnancy and childbirth and that first week completely different than what we do. And I don't know how to really have those conversations in the Black community without it turning out as people coming back and saying, you're taking the blame off of doctors. And I'm not trying to. Doctors have their blame. Doctors, the fact that we are in a medicalized society where we push medicine, we push drugs, we push interventions unnecessary.
Mhm.
Like, all of that is on doctors, and they need to own that. But at the same time, in order for us to have some type of locus of control in this, we need to know, like, what are those things that we can do differently where we can combat the power dynamic that's felt in the labor delivery room or immediately postpartum. Did that make sense?
No, it makes complete sense. And you're right. Sometimes it is hard to have these conversations. And I think that's because I can only speak for myself. My mom had C-sections for all three of us. She didn't breastfeed any of us. So she did not understand. Like, I wanted certain things in the beginning when I was all, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about like being pregnant and reading all these things and wanting a more natural birth. And she's like, why would you want to do that? Like, why? How long are you going to breastfeed? Like, all these things. And it wasn't like she was against it. She didn't necessarily understand it. And I think that's a part of this whole conversation about decolonizing, because I shared in the Parenting Decolonized Facebook page, a post about how slaves were wet nurses and why we have to talk about this in order to really understand why there's a Black breastfeeding week. And when your body for centuries is not your own, your children are not yours, some of that gets carried over from generation to generation. And it's hard, we had a lot of Black midwives and Black doulas, and the government got rid of them. There was all kinds of propaganda against doulas and midwives in the early 1900s, and it created this space where if you didn't give birth in a hospital and if you didn't give birth with a doctor, then you're risking your child's life. And that's a message that I think a lot of older generations of Black people still carry along with them. Plus the push for formula and all these things, it just is led to a lot of misinformation. And so the conversation is difficult because I think there's a lot of confusion around it. And that's why we need to talk about it more. All this stuff that we don't want to talk about and sweep under the rug, I'm done. We're not doing that anymore. We're about to air out some of our dirty laundry in order for us to move forward.
High five, sister.
Hey, girl. Okay, so what I want to know, and you already talked about this a little bit, but what else can we do to advocate politically, to advocate for our families should they be in a situation like that? Like, what can we as Black women and as Black people in general do for ourselves to help the medical field along in this journey?
That's a great question. So I'm going to start at like the greatest impact we can have and then go down to a personal kind of impact. So at the population level, almost every state has what's called a fetal and infant mortality review team, maternal mortality review team, or committee. And all of these states have to have members of the affected population as a part of their team. Now, when I ran it in Georgia, it was really hard to get people from the affected population to join the review team. Or then once they joined, it was really hard to get them to talk. And it's intimidating. You're in a room full of, 20 to 25 people, and everyone is some type of MD that you've never even heard of before. And they're reviewing these cases in a really clinical sense and talking about what happened to these women and why they died or what happened to these babies. And you might not understand it. It could be over your head, the medical jargon, all that stuff. I totally get that feeling of being lost. However, we need people from the affected population on these committees, because the next thing that happens after we review these is that we come up with recommendations. What are the steps that hospitals need to take? What are the systematic approaches that need to be done the next time? And if your voice isn't heard in that conversation, then we're not taking your voice into account when making these recommendations that now the hospitals will have to follow. That's one piece.
Wow, that's actually a really big piece.
And we need to join those teams, educate ourselves so that we feel confident enough to speak at those meetings, and then make sure that your voice is heard in the recommendation part. So that will make statewide change. Okay, so then community level change. Next thing we need to do is be sure that we are having these conversations around our dinner tables, around Thanksgiving, and on every year at my family for Thanksgiving, we take a half an hour to be serious. What's the serious we need to talk about as a family? And then we do that thing. So, like, I think instituting something like that in families where we know that there's going to be the time that we have a serious conversation that's going to push us forward as a family, that's something that we could do at the community level.
Right.
And then at the individual level, it's really about how can we look at those medical recommendations that are coming out, the ones that make us roll our eyes, but still take away from it the gist of what it's trying to say. Black women don't want to hear that weight is a contributor to factors that cause adverse outcomes. We always want to say things like the scales are off, they're comparing us to white women, that they don't understand the physique of a Black body. And these are things that we say to discount the information that's coming from the medical society about weight. One thing that we have to know is that weight during pregnancy is an extremely high indicator of something being able to go wrong. Weight, fat cells is where estrogen lies. And so if we're coming into pregnancies, if we're having way more hormonal differences, then that can have a negative impact on the birth outcomes that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if it's the hormone that is a reproductive hormone, right? So I know that we get really sensitive in our communities about them testing people who are overweight for gestational diabetes or hypertension every time they come in. They're just looking for it. They can't accept that we are of our weight and healthy. That's not it. It's the fact that when you're of a certain weight, healthy to unhealthy switch happens quickly. And it can change week to week. So I think it's another thing of just really taking the messages and trying to find a way to figure out like what it is, what's the meaning behind it, what drives that message, and moving forward with it. A lot of times we're leaving our doctors, we're getting upset, we're taking offense when in essence, like this is the piece that is driving a lot of our negative health outcomes.
Okay, Theresa, you spoke about what we can do to advocate for ourselves and individually and community wise. What else can we do to advocate for ourselves in our community?
I think one of the things I find interesting is that in this country, Hispanic women have one of the best birth outcomes. It's not white women, it's Hispanic women. And I think that that's interesting because income wise, Blacks and Hispanics are pretty much closer to each other than white and Hispanics. And so you would think that if it was income or poverty or things like that, that Hispanic women would have birth outcomes similar to Blacks, but they don't. And one of the reasons why is because there's this saying in Hispanic communities that means something loosely translated as not across her door or not by her door. And what that means is that in the Hispanic community, they really take pregnancy and pregnant women and try their hardest to make sure that no bad news crosses their door. They try their hardest to ensure that while women are gestating, that they're not experiencing the stress that the world has to offer. And that's something that we don't have. It doesn't translate to the Black experience in America. So one thing to think about is the impact of stress on the body and what that does, not just what it does regularly, and then how it impacts a pregnant body. So we already know that stress is bad, right? Like we get stress headaches, we stress eat, all that kind of stuff, our hypertension because of stress. But if you add to the fact that you're growing a human at the same time with this stress, then it does completely different thing to both your body and the fetus's body. There's something called allostasis or allostatic load. And what that means is like the normal amount of kind of stress that you carry on your body. And it's a measurement of it. That's what allostatic load is. It's a measure of the normal stress that you carry. And if you think about it, the way that it works in Black people, there's a hypothesis called the weathering hypothesis. And what that means is, like, just think about your favorite jean jacket. If you wear that every day, it doesn't look as new as it started to. And then some holes start to appear and your jacket starts to look weathered, worn, right? And that's the same kind of hypothesis about what happens to the Black body. If we carry a high level of stress, a high allostatic load throughout our whole life, then our body starts to get weathered and worn. And so one of the things we found is that Black women over the age of 30, we have 5 times higher chance of dying as a result of pregnancy than a white woman age 30, right? So that 3 times rate that we talked about earlier increases once we turn 30. And that happens because of our allostatic load. We have been carrying a higher level of stress all throughout our lives, so that by the time that we're 30, our body doesn't look like a 30-year-old's body. Our body looks like a 50-year-old's body. The weathering hypothesis says that as we age, Black people, our bodies age at a quicker rate than white people's body ages because of that extra stress that we have been carrying since childhood, since our first experience with racism, on and on. It just never gets to dissipate for us. So it's like we constantly live our lives as if we have run into a lion, right? When you run into a lion, you go into fight or flight mode. But that's the mode that Black people live at in the United States. And so if we are constantly at fight or flight mode and our allostatic load never decreases, then it starts to wear on our body to the point that by the time it's time for us to get pregnant, by the time we are of age to have a healthy pregnancy, we don't get to experience we don't get to experience that because our bodies are already so worn by being born and living in the United States.
And that just kind of, when you say it like that, I'm wondering if it even starts before we're born. You know what I'm saying? Stress inside the womb, it's like the womb to the tomb. We're just stressed out. The mother's stress transfers to the baby, right? So if we're already hella stressed at 30 years old over here with an internal clock of a 50-year-old, and our bodies are internalizing that, then our babies are going to feel that stress, and they come out in a stressful, traumatic environment in the hospitals or at home, and then into the school system, and then into the world. I mean, it's a lot. It's very overwhelming for me to even talk about right now, because how do we protect our children then?
It is a lot, and you really did define it. Because if you look at the normal gestation for a human being is 40 weeks. But if you look at Black people, our normal gestation is somewhere around 38 weeks. So 2 weeks shy of what a normal pregnancy is. That's because our womb is so stressed that it becomes a place that our fetuses need to get out of quicker than white women. And so we're starting off our life with 2 weeks less development. In that 2 weeks left, there's something called the Martyrdom's brain card. And it tells us what happens in that last 2 weeks of pregnancy to an infant's brain. So our babies are being born with smaller brains because they're being born 2 weeks earlier than the average white baby in America. And so this really it's a huge circle of life that is happening. And that's why I talked about from the beginning. The same things that cause fetal deaths are the same thing that cause infant death are the same things that cause maternal death, because this cycle that we're on is kind of unending.
It's so frustrating to hear. I'm trying not to be all emo on the podcast, but it's just so frustrating to hear, because what you and I and the people in this the conscious parenting group, what we're working towards is helping our children and our community learn new ways of parenting, learn how to give our children a childhood that they don't have to recover from. But it feels like they're going to need to recover from something anyway, because we out here and we Black, and there's anti-Blackness everywhere, and there's unconscious bias everywhere. It's like, where do we begin to combat this? Where do we begin? If it starts in the womb, how do we help our children? This is a whole other ass conversation, y'all. I apologize. It's in my head. I'm going to have to edit this out. But let me go back to maternal mortality rates, because I can go off on a tangent.
Wait. I want to answer your question, though.
Okay. Well, answer it, girl.
Okay.
Shoot.
So in the workforce, there's something called a leaky pipeline. So we always hear about like the pipeline to success. Oh, if you do this internship and you do this and on, you can join that pipeline, right? But there's something called a leaky pipeline. Like, where are all the places where that pipeline cracked? And that's what we need to find here. We need to create a leaky pipeline to maternal mortality, a leaky pipeline to fetal and infant death. Like, we need to find places in this pipeline to crack. So I don't think that there's one answer. I think that the answer is where are all the different places that we can intervene. And for me, I take that same 3-level approach that I talked about before, where I take an individual approach, I take a community level approach, and I take a systematic approach. Like, there has to be policy changes that we can put in place. There has to be changes we do as a community. What if, as a community, we rallied around our pregnant women and we said, no, we're not going to allow stress to get past their door, right? What if we took on that? What would that look like for us? And then at the individual level, what if we made some of those behavioral changes that we don't want to make? What if we made those behavioral changes that we question all the time? Why is it that we have to do this? Like, these are things that these are 3 different levels that we need to all be working at. And then the last part is that we need to be infusing people who look like us into the medical workforce.
Yes.
The conversations that are had at tables where I'm at are completely different when I'm the only one in the room or when there's 6 of us in the room. So we need to be infusing Black people, Black women into these fields where there's no room for us or where there hasn't been room for us traditionally. Right. And so I think that once all that starts to happen, these conversations get to change.
Well, Theresa, is there a board or an organization where Black women can look to help understand more of what we just spoke about today? Is there a place that I can send them so we can further this conversation?
Yes. Black Mamas Matter. They're amazing. And then the next thing I would say is start locally. Your local health department has some initiative on Black babies and keeping Black moms and Black babies healthy. Find out what it is. Find out what you can sit on. Find out what you can do. Some of them you have to be nominated by, either the head of the health department or somebody there. So find out what you can do in the meantime. How do I get nominated? What's the process? What do I need to have? What skills do I need? But there's definitely local ways that you can get connected. And I really hope that everyone listening figures out how and joins.
I agree. And I also want to have a call to action to you guys. We have this election coming up next year and this presidential election. And there also will be some local elections too, I believe. But with these presidential elections, I really want everyone to listen to what they're saying in regards to Black maternal mortality. If they're not having the conversation, then let's make them have a conversation. We can hit these people up on Twitter, on social media, and we can have them answer these questions for us in town hall meetings, and make sure that they are addressing this. We need to know what these candidates think about this and what they're willing to do about it. It's important. So your voice does matter. I really hope that more of us become involved politically, because if we do, we can get our voices out there and we get our needs met. It will take more time and more resources, but still, this whole idea that our voices don't matter is not true. We have to start making them matter. Even if we have to be walking around here doing protests, we need to figure it out, because too many of us are dying. We don't need to be.
Exactly. That's a great way to end it. Follow me on Theresa_Chapple at Twitter, and I have these conversations often. And this is another way that you can get involved and engaged and figure out what's happening locally.
Well, Theresa, this has been super illuminating. You have blown my mind with some of this information about stress and some of these stats. And I definitely want to continue to have this conversation with you. Where can everyone find you?
Follow me on Twitter. I am Theresa_Chapple. That's my Twitter handle. Chapel is CH and then the word apple.
Okay. I need to go ahead and follow you, girl, because I haven't. I'm so bad on Twitter. But I want to end this with asking you, what does it mean to you to decolonize parenting?
To me, that means that we're really being conscious about taking parenting from a lens that is ours and not the lens of what American society wants it to look like. For me, it means that I am centering my Black child, I'm centering my Blackness in my parenting style. And it means that I am looking at the best way to navigate living in a society that wasn't made for me, a society that has said that they don't want us here multiple times. And I'm making a niche for myself and for my child to both not just survive, but to thrive.
Lovely, lovely. Well, thank you so much again for coming on. I really appreciate you. And you guys make sure to follow her on Twitter and look for more conversations around Black mortality rates coming up. Thank you guys. Have a good day.
Woo, that was just wow. I never knew some of those facts. We're going to continue this discussion about Black maternal mortality rates on the Parenting Decolonized Facebook page. Please make sure to subscribe on iTunes or anywhere you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to leave a rating or review. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.
This podcast is a part of the Maisie Media Network, a community of podcasts for women by women.